Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. If you like this presentation and think it's useful, thank me. If it doesn't work, blame Ryan Petty, because when I first arrived with the city 5 years ago, he said, this just might work. And he was all over the place and very busy, probably still is, but had time enough to get this project off to a good start. So I just can't thank you enough for that, because we started off originally with our public outreach with a couple of hundred angry people, and when we had our hearing a month ago, we had three people comment and 3 letters. They were all in support. So you can exhaust people with process and some good answers. So my theme today is really about the value of doing area-wide planning. I think I'm probably preaching to the choir given who's here today, but area-wide planning, concentrated redevelopment efforts, how do things tie together? And towards the end of my presentation, I'm going to talk about the disconnect with some of the stormwater approaches that Washington State and other states have taken. I was asked in a pre-conference meeting to present solutions to that, and I almost stepped down from the panel. I don't have any solutions. I can just point to the question, and maybe cleverer people can figure out a way to answer it. So this is our downtown Tacoma Regional Growth Center. How many here are familiar with Vision 2040 and Transportation 2040, at least know what they are? Okay, those are the regional documents that are covering Pierce, King, Snohomish, and Kitsap County. The elected officials in those areas get together to do consensus-style planning under the Growth Management Act. And so the Vision 2040 is all about centers, redeveloping in centers and connecting centers. So we have the Regional Growth Center here. We had not been able to do some sub-area planning because of funding limitations, but we aspired to doing that. And sub-area planning is actually a requirement now for the Puget Sound Regional Council to give transportation funding. So when you think about link extension and some of the other things, this is important groundwork. So let me go forward. Nationally, there was a competitive program. Puget Sound Regional Council came out towards the top, got $5 million for a growing transit communities initiative. And what this was about was, and it is about, is how do we concentrate redevelopment around transit. For those of you who know Tacoma, the Dome District, with all of its regional bus service, its local bus service, its commuter rail, has 4 residents. They're all on our advisory committee for the area, but there's room there, if you know the area at all, or when you're going back home this evening, or out visiting this evening, there's room for 10, 20, 30,000 people to live in a mixed-use development with one of the most transit-rich areas in the state. So this initiative that Puget Sound Regional Council set up was to, how do they get the most out of their existing link investment? How much more will they get when they go north to Everett, sometime to Tacoma maybe, and over to Redmond and Bellevue? And so how do we get transit-rich communities make the most use of that, get away from the single occupancy vehicle? So as part of this effort, the $5 million effort, we were able to secure $500,000 to do a sub-area plan for the south part of downtown. So we did this project jointly with the University of Washington Tacoma, which is the gray area on the map there. Take in the Dome area, the Brewery District, some of the housing on the hill. We also included the whole Theophos area. So what our plan was to do, plan is to do a sub-area plan, an environmental impact statement, to pre-approve 30 million square feet of new floor space in downtown. So there won't have to be project-by-project traffic review, project-by-project analysis of archaeology, and all these other issues. So we basically are trying to jumpstart development so you come in and you get your building permit in 3 months. And so I've gone to that. So awful lot of planning in Tacoma. I'm not going to try and read those, but a tremendous amount of planning has been done. Design studies after design studies. The campus, UWT campus, has a master plan, but they haven't been pulled together in an organized way. We've tried to do that, so we have policies, regulations, and capital facilities planning. And so given the fact the city's in such poor financial straits, trying to get the most out of every investment, whether it's a water line. Where's Tony? Yeah, whether it's a water line or sewer line, how can we get the most out of that and get our streets back up into the condition we want them to be in? So that's one of the themes. Focusing a little bit more on South Downtown. That's just the close-up. As I indicated to you, one of the things we need to do is do this work to maintain eligibility for federal, state, and regional transportation funding. We need to coordinate our action to get street upgrades and utility upgrades. And then bottom line is a competitive advantage, because you all probably know jurisdictions that can take 2 years to approve a project. If we can do it in 3 months, that gives us a little advantage. UWT, for instance, they're building a new Y up on Market Street. They're going straight, they went straight to the building permit stage for a 20,000 square foot building with, and are under construction. So we're always excited to draw stuff down to the University of Washington Tacoma campus rather than the Seattle campus. So, and for those who aren't aware of it, UWT is going from 4,000 students to 14,000 or so students over the next 20 years. So anything we can do to accelerate that effort, we're trying to do. So on this regional planning framework, and this does tie to stormwater in the end, but under this regional framework with the Puget Sound Regional Council, the major metropolitan areas are required to plan for large numbers of new residents and jobs. And so in our case, we're about 200,000 residents. We're supposed to add 76,000 to those. 100,000 or so jobs, supposed to add 64,000. We've done lots of market studies and simply capacity analysis. We've got lots of room to do that, even in just portions of downtown. The reality, though, is it's not happening. And so we're growing at half the rate of Pierce County's urban area. The forecast, PSRC's forecasts are for 25,000 more people, 50,000 more jobs. So we're way shy of what, but we are required to plan for this higher level, and we are. And so that gets us to that stage. Those of you who are familiar with environmental impact statements know that you tend to look at the project and you identify all the impacts and then all the mitigations, and it doesn't necessarily matter a great deal where the project is. Well, we did this EIS in a very different way, working with bioarchitecture and the UW facilities folks, and we looked at it in terms of Vision 2040 and Transportation 2040 are all about centers, growing in centers. How do we attract development? How do we leverage investment in centers? And when we looked at our regulations, everything we touch in downtown is going to get better as a result of redevelopment. We're going to get current stormwater requirements met. We're going to get brownfields cleanup work as appropriate. We're going to have infrastructure upgrades. We're going to add more landscaping rather than taking away landscaping. So our whole thesis, and the EIS is finished and published and is usable. So in South Downtown, you can go straight to the building permit stage. But we basically, the conclusion is that if you have an interest in planning and growth management and steering things away from low density sprawl, you should be coming into downtown Tacoma. So as I mentioned before, these are the policy frameworks: develop in relationship to transit, leverage the South Downtown assets, a lot of transit, as I was saying before, a lot of connections. You've seen today or tomorrow, you'll see the Prairie Line Trail starting to emerge going through UWT campus. We're close to finalizing the next two pieces going up to 26th Street and down to Theophos. And so we were funded regionally. Again, back to this planning theme: do good planning, get funded. We came out #1 for capital funding for our Prairie Line Trail extension. So Ryan, it paid off in the end. It took a while. So we have $2 million. UWT will be finished this summer. We should be finished by fall. That section will take us down from here down to the water. Synergies with UWT, I've mentioned. We have a great relationship with everyone at UWT across the whole range of things. And The Foss Waterway, again, Superfund site, cleaned up, but we have a long way to go, a lot of development potential, a lot of public esplanade potential, a lot of other potential down there. So trying to tie all these things together. I know most folks are here from Washington State. Is everyone, can I have a show of hands, who's familiar with the National Environmental Policy Act? Okay. How many come from states that have a state equivalent? In this state, it's the State Environmental Policy Act. Less hands, okay. Well, this is what this EIS is all about, is that for projects over a certain size, 10 or 20 or 20,000 square feet, you end up doing an environmental checklist and public review. If someone doesn't like your project, they can challenge it. It can go on for years. We have a couple of sad examples in Tacoma about that. So what this infill, the legislature has not been willing to get rid of SEPA. SEPA and NEPA came in the early 70s. After that period, the Growth Management Act passed in 1990, 91. What we were all told to do then was develop regulations covering specific topics, and wetlands are protected, steep slopes, watershed areas. So we had all these protections in place, but we still kept SEPA, and we still have the checklist and the review, and that review, unlike some characteristics of NEPA, is actually that review goes against. It's a substantive review against policies. So you can find a disconnect between the project and comprehensive plan policies and require mitigations. Query, why should you be doing that when you've got a whole array of regulations that are supposed to be doing that already? So the one thing we got out of this discussion was that under the State Environmental Policy Act, the emphasis was to, if you did a sub-area plan, an environmental impact statement covering 20 years worth of development, you can skip SEPA. So that is a huge opportunity for folks to get beyond that project by project review, which can take 6 months on a bigger project or a year on others. And so cutting that down is important to a lot of people. Just the census figures to show you the different growth rates. Now we get into stormwater regulations. This is an issue that Councilmember Bowe raised. He's an architect in his daytime job, and has been really concerned about the fact that we're trying to redevelop, we're trying to bring development into these areas, but we've got brownfields areas, we've got expensive land, we've got expensive stormwater requirements, and yet you can go out to East Pierce County and dig a large, I'm exaggerating, dig a large hole and drive your single occupancy vehicle back and forth and call it good. So where's the focus on trying to redevelop in existing areas when it's much cheaper to be a phase 2 community and not have to do monitoring, source control, and limited requirements? Now, city can do these, and Laura knows we do these things, but we do it at a price. We charge fees. The capital cost for each project is high in an urban area. So the disconnect is, in our opinion, is we should be making it easier to do stormwater work in cities from a planning point of view. I'm not talking about water quality, I'm just talking about planning point of view, if we're going to meet our objectives in some of these other areas. Development comparison, inside the UGA, as I said, higher land prices, more costly infrastructure, infiltration or detention may be limited. As I mentioned positive brownfield issues, and the demolition costs. So once you go through that list and then you think about going to a green field out 50 miles from here, you get lower land prices, simpler infrastructure improvements, more room for infiltration. Brownfields are unlikely, and they're generally building new rather than remodeling. And UWT's done a fabulous job with, I hope you have time to look at some of these buildings. I mean, they are lead this and lead that as far as standards, but they have taken historic buildings and remodeled them, and it certainly was new construction would have been competitive. but not everyone has the wherewithal that UWT does to do those things. So this just gives you some figures. This whole division between phase 1 and phase 2 of all things goes back to the 1990 census. You may know this already. 100,000 population threshold, be no additions. So we have communities that are getting up in our size that aren't required to do phase 1. Because Tacoma is on the list, Pierce County is as well for their urban growth area. But phase 2 is 80 cities and 4 counties, and it has notes at the bottom that includes small cities like Vancouver, Bellevue, and Everett. So someone hopefully can. There is no explanation to that. The answer is that's just how the calculation is done. Apologize for the extra bullets. I'm not savvy enough to get rid of them. So if we're going to be clever enough to focus our growth in existing urban areas, I think we have to be much more careful about having these huge disconnects between costs in different parts of the region. And I have no idea how one bridges that. It would be easier if you had a regional stormwater system covering the entire region. Then you could discount things here and make them more expensive there. But you actually have an incentive for people to move further out, set up special districts of one kind or another, and avoid the costs of redeveloping. And then, again, as many of you, or most of you know, there's this huge issue. Apparently, I presented to a group of stormwater folks who that the State Department of Commerce brought together, and they said, none of this growth management stuff has got anything to do with us. And I won't name them by name, but they're people that I was surprised to hear that from. We just do stormwater. And by the way, 5 or 6 years from now, the phase 1 and phase 2 permit requirements will be much the same. But meanwhile, there are appeals going on, and that everyone keeps saying we need to be nice to these small jurisdictions. Is that 5 or 6 years going to turn into 15 or 16 years? Is this disconnect going to continue for a longer period? Because that's where the pressure is coming from. Anyone who isn't phase 1 doesn't want to be there. And it comes up at the legislature, it comes up at these meetings. Because of this issue and some other concerns, State Department of Commerce has brought a task force together to see if there is some way to address this challenge. Laura was clever enough to get me nominated to the committee rather than her. And so if you really want to punish someone, have them on this committee. It's still open. So that we have all this information is on our website. My focus is on the sub-area plan and EIS. This issue came up along the way, wanted to address it, but we're particularly excited about the pre-approval. And if I go back really quickly to the first slide, probably an easier way to do this. Because of the interest we've secured in the sub-area approach, the State Community Economic Revitalization Board is paying for a sub-area plan for North Downtown that we're well underway with, and we're finishing up a sub-area plan for Hilltop, for the Hilltop MLK area. So by the end of this year, we should have 3 sub-area plans in place and be able to have the open for business sign clearly up there. This will also help with the application that the decision was made recently to, this is not a precise line, to come up the hill and send Multicare's hospitals here, St. Joseph's here, is to extend the link light rail up the hill and connect the 2 hospitals along MLK. Community healthcare is opening up a new healthcare facility right in the midst of Hilltop. The opening's in a couple of weeks. So we're really excited about the catalytic effect of doing this advanced environmental impact statement, of doing the sub-area plan. What people are getting out of this is certainty, but what they're losing is the right to appeal individual projects under SEQA. So bring your issues up early. The state legislation requires we do extensive outreach to get to this stage. You have to have briefing meetings before your hearings and lots of public notice, because you really are saying to people, do you really want this to happen in an expeditious way to the extent you're willing to give up some appeal rights later? And as I said, we start off with a lot of very concerned people, particularly in Hilltop, where we have a lot more residential development. Their concerns, though, were after a while they realized it wasn't going to change in the next 3 years. It was going to change in the next 30 years, and some regular investment would be a better pattern than stagnation. And so we've got very strong support in the Stadium District for more redevelopment there as well. So very much an economic development approach to planning, just the way Mr. Petty told me to when I got started. And so I'd be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Give him a round of applause.